So I've come in slightly on the false pretenses that I didn't do a lot of assessing this. I did say to them that 10% of the marks would be for their participation in the Twitter stream. And when it came to assessing, I decided that trying to give a very nuanced graduation of marking it was too difficult. There were too many of them. There were thousands of tweets to look at. So I did a crude count and said that because I'd asked them to find at least 5 journal articles and 5 practitioner resources, that so long as there were in any one student's stream 5 peer-reviewed journal articles and 5 practitioner resources, that would give them the 10% of the module they were getting. And most of them got that. So most students did successfully generate enough content, like for the Twitter element, they got 100% of what was available. But in terms of whether that is a subtle use of Twitter for assessment, it seems a bit unsubtle. It was really quantity that I used rather than how effective they were at saying things in 140 characters. So I'm left with maybe the same questions. I certainly felt that it did support learning. They didn't know anything about Twitter before they started, most of them. They became quite good at using Twitter, the conventions, the strengths of it and the weaknesses. And beyond that, they used Twitter in an effective way to highlight work they were doing, highlight contributions they made to other student discussions, and build a library of resources. And I thought that some of the tweets had required students to be quite analytical in quite a small, in that constraint of 140 characters. I thought that in terms of whether it was best before, during, and after, they needed a lot of structure. The most effective tweets were where they had something very clear to do, and the more general instructions were just use Twitter, look at it, find stuff that was interesting. Didn't seem to produce much of relevance. I've gone rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. No one's asked me any questions or said anything as we go along. You suggested that I turn it over to a discussion.
Well, this is very fascinating stuff. So I haven't heard that before, and I do think it's fascinating. And it is interesting what you say about the young people think young people aren't actually using Twitter so much. Perhaps they're using Facebook more.
Oh, very much so, yes. 100% usage of Facebook.
And they do it off their phones.
And they do it from their phones, yes. Yeah. But I'd be interested to know if any of you are teaching undergraduate programs, and do you see evidence of people in the sort of under 30-year-olds tweeting? And you personally know people under 30 who tweet? I know very few. Where they're required to.
So it's interesting that it has. It's developed, and you assume that new technology is primarily taken up by the young with the open minds and they're interested in gadgets and stuff. There's obviously isn't that something that immediately takes to them, but nonetheless, increasingly social marketing is being seen as a necessity by all big brands. And it's my impression that big brands are starting to use it because other big brands are.
Yes.
Not necessarily because they understand quite how good or effective it may or may not be.
I have a sense that this is a sort of somewhat self-fulfilling thing, that if people who are digital marketing professionals are doing it amongst themselves and saying it's very important, and journalists who report, through which maybe to some extent a lot of us get our perception of what's going on in the world, also think it's very important, then it's quite possible for it to appear more important than perhaps it is to some other sectors of the economy. And I think the last general election was billed in advance. There was a lot of talk in the broadsheets, at any rate, of it being the first Twitter election.
Well, the American presidential election even more so.
Yes, but I think I think in America, I think this is UK specific. I think in America a lot of young people do use it. I don't know why the difference is, but if you look at random tweets from America, and a very significant proportion of them do seem to be from young faces, and quite a lot of them, disproportionately for the ethnic proportion, quite a lot of them young black faces. In this country, there was all that talk in the lead up to the last general election of this being the election by the Twitter sphere, and then it turned out that the TV debates seemed to be the most influential thing afterwards. So.
I mean, the other thing that interests me is your second question: can anything worth assessing be said in 140 characters? You said that the best ones were the ones where you're giving them some structure, and they had actually managed to synthesize right down. So some salient points. And it strikes me it's almost assessment by haiku. That you know, the haikus are supposed to be so good because they're so tightly written that huge amounts are said very deeply in a very small number of words. And it strikes me as if could be something in doing this. The question of what weight you might give it in the overall scheme of things.
Yes, because I think it's open to debate whether a student who reads an article, to me these were the most carefully composed tweets that I saw, and there were 40 or 50 like such. I picked 3 from 3 students who I've identified their tweets now, ranging from. I mean, she's not used the structure at all, but she has engaged with the article. I didn't say look at the map, I gave her the article. She's looked at the map, and it is quite a confusing map. I feel that gave me some sense that it is a worthwhile thing to continue with beyond just saying use this to point at stuff.
Yeah. Do they look further at tweeting in general and broader, the language of tweeting? I mean, they could have been even more economic with their characters by being looking around at what people do.
Like sort of text to speech, or speech
well,
type.
But also the various symbols and icons that get dropped in and used.
This was quite early in there. This was probably in the 2nd week of use. I would say about a quarter of the students. Well, I didn't do an accurate count, but some proportion of students adopted Twitter, and some still use it, and some still ping me stuff even from my first cohort 2 years ago. Occasionally, I see them address something to me. But a significant number, probably maybe as many as half, just did what they were told. So they did about 10 or 11 tweets, and that was it. So there's quite a big difference in how sophisticated they became as Twitter users. This was very early.
One of the things that strikes me about those examples there is that it raises much the same question we were raising during Paul's contribution. What you have to unpick is all the learning and the knowledge that underlies those 140 characters in those three phrases quite graphically illustrate simplified aspects of maths processes. I'm guessing that there's a real understanding.
Yes, I think that these comments seem opposite.
But your question about can you assess them raises that question we were grappling with earlier about how do you assess the learning that's gone into an artifact or a process when the learning isn't evident?
It's like a tip of an iceberg.
Absolutely.
Yes, and if 2 students both spent, let's say, 2 hours or 3 hours, this article to really to get through it for someone who doesn't read academic articles every day, I would say it would take a couple of hours to get your head around what it's about, enough to be able to say is the methodology suitable and so on. If a student spends 2 hours and then one student is not so good at compressing their thoughts into 140 characters, that's one of the reasons that I felt it was very difficult to say, well, she only gets 3% and this one gets 9% and this one gets 7%. In the end, I said they all get 100% for having looked at the article and said something about it.
In terms of assessing something for purposes of a marketing course, actually the ability to synthesize something complex down strikes me as might actually be very appropriate.
They did also get assessed. They may have got assessed for using Twitter again in that this was only 10% of the mark. About 70% of the mark was building a digital marketing artifact, which some made viral videos, some made blogs. There it was as if they were the owner of a brand or a product or a service, or they invented one for themselves, but mostly they picked an existing company. So a typical example might be to look at Goop's female beauty products and to build a Twitter stream about publicising that. And there I would have marked on, were they able in a very short, 140 characters to say, new skin cream brings wonderful and celebrity endorsement, see great pic of Kate Moss here or something. If they could pull together something that was a genuine marketing message, so So there were times when I, separate from this type of tweet, which they all have to do, if a student chooses to use Twitter as their demonstration of their marketing, then yes, I would expect them to use it like a marketeer.
But I assume you weren't just thinking about assessing individual tweets then. If you're looking at how somebody's using Twitter as a marketing tool, you can look at
Yes, building a campaign, so building
absolutely,
awareness.
and
and then
how you're
responding.
using Twitter rather than... Because I think we get very caught up in the 140 characters thing. Twitter's a lot more than that.
Absolutely, yes. And so the students who, but no student use Twitter alone as their marketing tool. So a typical thing would be to have something like a blog with
Yeah.
tweets publicising new content
Yeah.
to the blog over a period of 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So sort of 20 tweets and 8 or 10 blog postings would have been the typical
Yeah.
submission. But when Pauline talked about the difficulty of marking up, looking at artifacts, I got a lot of resonance from that, because one student might do that and another might have made a video that they clearly spent hours and hours on, but it was just a single thing and maybe not terribly good as a professional product, but maybe full of good ideas. And some students said to me, I'm frightened of the technology, can I do a set of storyboards? Which seemed entirely appropriate, because I think actually a business student is much more likely to go to an agency and say, here's the kind of idea I've got, rather than actually get a camera and a video editing software and so on. So, but I had a lot of difficulty, and I had quite a lot of argument with my external examiner about how to mark. But I'm going off topic here, my assessment difficulty. How do you mark things that are completely different from each other and using different sets of skills, but trying to achieve? I gave a marking scheme.
That's the problem of this afternoon, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Yes, Pauline.
I don't know what to say really. Yes, it is a problem entirely, and it seems like the more innovative you are, the more arguments you're likely to have an external examiner, I think.
Everybody's happy with an exam script and a 10,000 word essay. They all know what's
Yeah.
going to happen there.
But in your estimation, do you think that the processes that you put them through, fired them up, if I can use that as an expression,
Yeah,
rather than doing the essay?
they didn't have to do an essay from me, and
Yes.
and they really, I mean, they liked it, but it wasn't. I don't think largely it was because they got out of doing an essay. It was that they really engaged with making stuff.
Yes.
Some of them got very anxious. Some got quite obsessive and spent far too long on it. I think.
Yes.
You've got all these other final year modules you're going to be doing. You can't spend 800 hours editing your video to
Yeah.
perfection. But then that's very difficult for a student. I did feel some concern about what was fair to them.
But then in that respect, they sort of engage more with that as a module, with that as an assessment type. Surely that shows how much that will work for a student, having a more innovative type of assessment as opposed to what could be an essay or an exam prep in another module. Like that's why they focus so much on this module, because they could engage with it more and actually enjoy learning. And like in that sense, you've got to think of like, why do you use assessment? Is it an assessment for learning? Is it an assessment to learn? Is it an assessment by learning? And it's just that sort of stuff you need to think about with it as well, which is probably why they engage so much more with it, because they probably got more out of it.
Because the assessment was their learning
Yeah.
by doing the thing.
Yeah.
That's more or less
It's a walk into an example.
But your concern, I think, is right in the sense that they've got a lot of things to do at the end, and that if they put, if they're anxious and spend too much time doing this one because they're not sure how much time to put into it, then they might fail something else. And in today's environment, rightly or wrongly, people want to get good grades and exit with a first or another second or whatever it is. And so I think we do have to recognise that side of it as well.